It always begins with something small, something ordinary, the kind of detail that would seem ridiculous to remember 20 years later, and yet it is the one thing you can't forget for Angela Ruiz. It was the sound of her own knuckles against a painted wooden door. 3 quick taps, a pause, 3 more. That was all. It was just a knock. But in the memory she's replayed for decades, it goes on forever. It was late, just past midnight on an October night. In 1997, the corridors of West Hall had that muffled, echoing stillness that only college dorms can produce. Half-asleep laughter drifting from somewhere far down the hall, the faint thud of bass from someone's stereo 2 floors up, the sigh of old heating pipes as they came alive for the season. The air smelled faintly of microwave noodles and the cheap citrus-scented floor cleaner, the janitor swore. By Angela remembers standing outside room 317, her palm pressed flat against the cool frame. The light was on under the door. That was unusual. Being now her 2 closest friends, Casey and Lauren, would have been sprawled in bed reading by lamplight or half dozing in front of late-night television. Instead, the room was quiet, not silent, no. She was sure she heard something. It was faint, like a shuffle or the rustle of fabric. Once she thought she heard a whisper cut short mid-syllable. "Guys, it's me," she called softly, pressing her ear closer. Her voice seemed to vanish into the painted wood. No answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time. The hallway behind her felt impossibly long, empty. A flickering light bulb buzzed overhead. Somewhere a door clicked shut. She was about to walk away. Maybe they'd fallen asleep. Maybe she was imagining things when she noticed something strange. The sound from inside stopped, not faded, not moved away, just stopped. That was when her stomach tightened. It wasn't that they were ignoring her. It was as if they were holding their breath. She tried the doorknob, locked. That wasn't unusual either, but it felt wrong in that moment. "Casey, Lauren." Her voice had an edge, now louder than she intended. "It's me." Open up from inside. Nothing, no shuffling, no whisper. But now she could swear she heard the faintest metallic sound, like something being dragged slowly across wood. It lasted no more than a second before cutting off. Angela stepped back, glancing down the hallway, as if someone might be watching. The fluorescent light overhead blinked again, washing the walls in momentary shadow. When the light returned, the hallway looked the same as it always had, but somehow emptier. She knocked a 3rd time and a 4th. By now the sound seemed too loud, bouncing down the corridor and returning to her ears, as if mocking her persistence. Her hand ached from hitting the door. She didn't even realize she was whispering their names again and again, like a prayer or a plea. Somewhere deep inside her, a thought she didn't want to name began to form. Something was wrong. Years later, when she told her story to the police again and again, Angela would be asked to repeat every detail. Had she heard them laugh? Had she heard them cry? Could she be certain the sounds came from inside the room? She could never prove it. She could only say that she felt them there. And yet when the room was finally opened hours later, it was empty. Beds made, lights still on, books neatly stacked on the desk. The faint smell of perfume lingered in the air, as if its owner had just stepped out moments before. The only thing out of place was the closet door. No one noticed it at first, not until later, when an officer leaned in for a closer look. The hinges were normal, the handle unbroken, but along the inner edge small screw heads glinted in the lamplight. Not new ones, not neat ones. They'd been driven in hastily at awkward angles, like someone working in the dark. And the strangest part, every screw was driven from the inside. Angela didn't know that part until days later, when a detective let it slip. By then the official explanations had already begun. Misunderstandings, pranks, unconfirmed sightings elsewhere on campus. But the image was burned into her mind. Casey, Lauren, the locked room, the whisper cut short, and that final echoing knock that wouldn't stop. In the years since, she has replayed the scene countless times. The light under the door, the airless quiet, the invisible weight in the space between the knocks. Some nights, she tells herself, it was nothing more than a misunderstanding, a trick of the senses born from exhaustion. But on others, especially in October, when the evenings turn cold and the campus feels just as it did back then, she hears it again, that faint dragging sound, and the sudden suffocating stillness that followed, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong in a college dorm, the kind that belongs behind a door that was never meant to open. Before the shadows fell across West Hall, the campus was a painting, one of those idyllic autumn Nanabricure scenes, gold leaves gathering in lazy piles along brick pathways, lamplight glowing amber through the dusk, the bell tower chiming with an almost stubborn optimism. In 1997, life on campus had its own rhythm. Daylight meant chatter and movement, students balancing coffee cups and textbooks, professors in tweed jackets carrying folders fat with paper syllabi. After dark, the heartbeat of the place Shifted laughter spilling out of open dorm windows, cassette tapes rewinding, the occasional burst of music from a party no one had officially planned. There were no smartphones, then no constant tether to the outside world. You knew where your friends were by walking across the quad, not checking a screen. If you wanted to disappear for a night, you could. West Hall was one of the older buildings, its red brick exterior softened by ivy that clung to the walls like a memory that refused to fade inside. The dorm smelled faintly of laundry detergent and the lingering trace of every meal cooked in the shared kitchen. Over the years, the hallways were narrow, the doors painted a cheerful but chipping cream. Room 317 was home to two sophomores, Casey Lauren and Lauren Pierce. They couldn't have been more different. Casey was the planner, the kind who kept a calendar tacked above her desk with color-coded notes for every exam, every meeting, every study session. She wore her brown hair in a neat ponytail most days and had a way of making even sweatshirts look intentional. Lauren was the wild card, dark curls, thrift store jackets, and a laugh you could hear 3 doors down. She collected things that didn't match: a chipped teacup from a flea market, a faded movie poster of a film she'd never actually seen, a ceramic bird she claimed just showed up one day on her desk. Despite their differences, they fit together in the way certain roommates do, each filling the quiet spaces the other left behind. Casey kept Lauren's chaos from spilling too far. Lauren coaxed Casey out into the world when she might have stayed inside. Their room reflected them both. On one side, Casey's bed was tucked neatly against the wall, her desk stacked with textbooks, highlighters, and a small clock radio always tuned to the local news station. On the other, Lauren's bed was draped in a patchwork quilt surrounded by scattered paperbacks, an open makeup bag, and the faint scent of vanilla lotion. The closet sat between their beds, deep, narrow, with a single wooden door that stuck slightly when you pulled it open. They joked about it often, about how it was the one creepy thing in an otherwise perfect room. No one thought much of it. Then no one knew it would become the most important detail. Outside their window, campus life rolled on. The dining hall served chicken parmesan on Wednesdays. The student trunk coffee stand sold steaming cups of cinnamon tea for $1. Posters for an upcoming Halloween party fluttered on bulletin boards, promising costume contests and haunted tours of West Hall. The latter meant as a joke, a nod to old campus ghost stories. The real charm of the place was that nothing truly bad had ever happened there. At least that's what everyone believed. And so when Casey and Lauren walked across the quad that final Thursday afternoon, Casey balancing a stack of library books, Lauren sipping a Dr. Pepper, no one could have imagined that it was the last time they'd be seen in daylight. The sun was setting behind the bell tower, painting the windows of West Hall gold. From a distance, the building looked timeless, inviting, safe. But behind one of those cream-painted doors, the air was already beginning to change. Something unseen had entered the rhythm of the campus, moving slowly, deliberately toward room 317, and it wouldn't leave again. It began like any other Thursday, 5:14 p.m. Casey signed out 2 reference books from the library, Advanced Organic Chemistry and The Architecture of Memory. The librarian, a man named Paul Clements, remembered her because she asked whether the library stayed open later during midterms. She seemed tired, but polite. Lauren wasn't with her. 5:42 p.m. Lauren was seen outside the student union, leaning against the railing and smoking with a group of theater majors, one of them a sophomore named Nina McClure would later insist. Lauren seemed distracted, glancing at her watch every few minutes. When asked why, Nina just shrugged. Maybe she was meeting someone. 6:10 p.m. The two were spotted together in the dorm cafeteria, a tray with grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup between them. A friend from down the hall said they were quieter than usual, but laughed once when Lauren made a joke about the soup being watered-down ketchup. They stayed until the cafeteria closed. 7:00 p.m. back in their room, Casey called her parents a habit she kept every Thursday evening. She told her mother she'd been studying that she and Lauren might watch a movie later. Nothing unusual in her tone. Lauren, meanwhile, left the room briefly to go to the vending machine 2 floors down. A freshman in the hallway swears he saw her carrying not just a soda, but 2 cans, 1 Coke, 1 Sprite. She never drank Sprite. 7:23 p.m. Casey returned to the library alone to return one of the books she'd checked out earlier, The Architecture of Memory. She told Paul, the librarian, she didn't need it. After all, this detail has bothered Angela for years. Casey was meticulous, and it wasn't like her to change her mind that quickly. 8:15 p.m. 2 classmates saw them walking across the quad toward the student lounge in West Hall. Lauren was carrying her Coke. Casey was carrying nothing, her hands deep in her coat pockets. It was already dark. The trees rattled in a cold wind that smelled faintly of rain. 8:50 p.m. in the lounge, they joined a small group watching Good Will Hunting on VHS. Witnesses say they didn't stay long, 20 minutes, maybe less. When they left, Lauren said she was meeting someone. Casey said nothing. 9:30 p.m., a student named Jared Holmes, who lived one floor above them, claims he saw Lauren at the end of the east hallway near the stairwell, talking to a tall man in a dark coat. He didn't recognize him and assumed he was from another dorm. Jared has changed small details of his story over the years. Sometimes the coat was black, sometimes dark brown, but he's always insisted it happened. 9:42 p.m. Campus security received a noise complaint from West Hall, second floor, loud music, possibly from a party. The guard who responded remembers walking past Casey and Lauren's room and hearing voices inside, 2, maybe 3. He later told police he can't remember what was being said, only that it stopped as soon as his footsteps approached. 10:07 p.m. Angela, on her way back from the study lounge, knocked on their door to ask if they wanted to join her for coffee. She heard faint sounds, movement, maybe a whisper, but no one answered. She walked away. She would return later, closer to midnight, for the knock that would stay with her forever. 10:30 p.m. The fire alarm went off in West Hall, triggered by burnt popcorn in the second-floor microwave. Everyone evacuated into the chilly night. In the crowd outside, multiple people remembered seeing Casey, but no one could confirm seeing Lauren. Casey stood alone, arms folded, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. When asked later, no one could recall seeing her re-enter the building after the all-clear. 11:15 p.m. A resident on the third floor told police she heard a dragging sound from inside room 317. She thought it might be furniture being moved. She went to the door, listened, and heard nothing else. 11:48 p.m. A call was made from the dorm's payphone to a number that traced back to a disconnected landline in another state. Records show it lasted less than 30 seconds. No one has ever confirmed who made it. Midnight, the hallway was nearly silent. A few doors shut. A muffled laugh somewhere distant in room 317. The light stayed on. What happened between then and Angela's final knock will never be known in full. What is certain is that by morning the beds would still be made, the books would still be neatly stacked, and the closet door would be screwed shut from the inside. Morning broke, gray over West Hall, the kind of light that doesn't so much arrive as seep in, flattening the edges of everything it touches. It was 9:17 a.m. when the first ripple of concern spread. Casey missed her chemistry lab by 1005. Lauren's professor noticed she wasn't in her literature seminar. This wasn't unusual for most students, but for these two, it was out of character. By late morning, friends were knocking on room 317's door. No answer. 11:42 a.m. The resident advisor, a senior named Tom Keller, arrived with his master key. Angela stood a few feet back, arms crossed tightly, watching. She swears now she knew even before the key turned that something was wrong. The door opened with a soft click. What met them first was the air, not foul, not stale, but weighted, as if the oxygen itself hesitated to move. The blinds were half drawn, letting in slits of dull daylight on Casey's bed. The comforter was perfectly straight, the pillow undented. Lauren's side of the room was equally neat, her quilt smoothed out, the edges tucked under with uncharacteristic precision. The desk lamp was on, casting a warm, almost cozy glow that felt painfully at odds with the silence. The books were stacked in neat columns. A pen rested horizontally atop a closed notebook. The Coke can from the night before was still on the desk, half full. At first no one noticed the closet. It sat between their beds, same as always, white painted with a brass knob, but when Tom tried to open it, the door didn't budge. Stuck, he muttered, tugging harder. The knob rattled, the hinges held. Angela stepped closer, frowning. That door had always opened with a reluctant squeak. This was different. Tom crouched to peer along the frame and froze. The screws were small, cheap, the kind you'd buy at a hardware store, in a dusty paper packet. They'd been driven into the inner edge of the frame, not the outer, their heads catching the light at awkward angles. There were 8 of them, unevenly spaced, sunk deep into the wood. The realization settled like a shadow in the room. The screws were on the inside. For a moment no one spoke. The hum of the desk lamp filled the space between them. Tom straightened, rubbing his palms against his jeans. We should get maintenance. His voice was thin, a little too fast. Maintenance arrived with a cordless drill. The whirring sound filled the hallway, drawing a small crowd of residents craning their necks to see. Angela didn't move from the doorway. She watched each screw come free, watched the way the wood seemed to groan with the pressure. When the last screw clinked to the floor, the worker hesitated before opening the door. Later he'd say he couldn't explain Why only that something about it felt wrong, like stepping into a room mid-conversation. The door swung inward inside. Nothing, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, just the bare interior of the closet, a wooden rod for hangers, an empty shelf above, and scuff marks along the baseboard. Except Angela noticed faint lines carved into the inside panel of the door just above knee height. At first, they looked like scratches, random, shallow, but they weren't random. They were parallel, repeated, some dragged downward as if made in a moment of panic. There was also a smell, faint, sweet, almost floral, clinging to the wood. Lauren's perfume. Tom asked if anyone had been in the room since last night. No one answered. Campus police arrived within the hour. They photographed the closet, the screws, the scratch marks. They bagged the Sprite can from the desk. Casey's notebook, the single hair caught on the inside edge of the closet hinge. By 2:00 p.m. the room was taped off. Students passing in the hall slowed their steps. Whispering rumors took shape in real time. The closet had been sealed because something was inside. The screws were to keep someone from getting out. Angela didn't speak. She just kept seeing that brass knob turning in her mind and the empty space behind it that somehow felt not empty at all. The official report that week noted no signs of forced entry and no conclusive evidence of foul play, but among the students of West Hall, the closet became the story, not the absence of the girls, not the unanswered questions. The closet, always the closet. By nightfall, West Hall had stopped feeling like a dorm and started feeling like a beehive. Someone had shaken. Conversations swarmed in every corner. Clusters of students leaning against doorframes, hunched together in laundry rooms, speaking in the low, urgent tones people use when they know they shouldn't be talking at all. The official statement from campus police had been brief. 2 residents of room 317 are currently unaccounted for. Investigation ongoing. No cause for alarm. No cause for alarm. The phrase traveled through the building like a joke. No one wanted to laugh at Angela sitting cross-legged on her bed. Could hear it even through the thin walls. She was meeting a guy. I swear no, both of them left together. My roommate saw them. Someone screwed the closet shut to keep something from getting out. Some theories were absurd ghost stories borrowed from the campus-owned folklore and dressed in new clothes. Others were specific enough to feel dangerous. A maintenance worker who acted weird that week, a professor who always took too much interest in Lauren's writing. By the next day, the rumors had sharpened into factions. The vanishing on purpose theory. Casey and Lauren had planned their own disappearance. Maybe they'd run off to New York. Maybe they'd been plotting for months. The neat beds, the stacked books, the sealed closet, all part of a dramatic attention-seeking statement. This theory appealed to the students who couldn't face the possibility of violence. The wrong place, wrong time theory. Something bad happened in the room. The closet was a quick, panicked attempt to hide something. When pressed on what, the theorists just shook their heads. You don't want to know. The one who stayed quiet theory. Someone in the building knew exactly what happened, and they were still here. Maybe more than one person, and maybe they were still listening. The most unsettling stories weren't about who might have taken them. They were about what had been heard. A sophomore named Eric claimed he woke around 3:00 a.m. that night to the sound of 3 slow knocks on his door. When he opened it, no one was there. A girl from the first floor swore she heard faint scratching in the walls behind her headboard. Every creak of the old building, every draft under a door suddenly felt like a clue. And then there was the transfer student. No one could agree on his name. Some said Tyler, others Trevor. Tall, pale, always in the same dark coat, had arrived mid-semester, never joined in conversations, and was sometimes seen in the library at odd hours. Nina, the theater major, swore she'd seen him speaking to Lauren near the east stairwell on the night they vanished, but when police asked for his dorm assignment, no one could produce it. By the following week, the whispers had warped him into something else entirely, not a person, but a figure, the kind you see in the corner of your eye or reflected briefly in a window. For Angela, the worst part wasn't the theories themselves, it was how quickly people began to speak of Casey and Lauren in the past tense. Not where are they, but remember when, not what happened. But I heard it was as if in the absence of facts, the stories had already started burying the truth in time. The hallway talk would be replaced by headlines, then by silence. But in those first days, when the air in West Hall still felt heavy and the closet screws sat in a plastic evidence bag on some detective's desk, the story lived here in the shadows, between door frames, in the way students glanced over their shoulders walking back from the bathroom at night, in the pause before anyone knocked on a door. Because even in the loudest moments of speculation, there was one question no one wanted to ask out loud. If someone sealed that closet from the inside, was it to keep the danger contained or to keep it from getting out? They came in 2 cars hours apart, both with headlights cutting through the gray drizzle that had settled over campus. Casey's parents arrived first. Her father, Robert, drove, hands locked on the wheel. Even after the car stopped in front of West Hall, her mother, Elaine, stayed still for a moment in the passenger seat, staring up at the brick facade, as though trying to memorize it. Angela would later recall the way they walked in, not quickly, not frantically, but with a strange tight-lipped focus, as though moving too fast might cause the world to tilt further out of balance. Lauren's mother came later, alone, no father in the picture, hadn't been for years. She wore a long wool coat, the cuffs damp from the rain. The coat was buttoned wrong, a detail Angela noticed only because everything else about the woman seemed so composed, so deliberate. She didn't cry when she was led inside. She barely spoke. Campus police had cleared the immediate area around room 317, but the yellow tape was still stretched across the doorway like a wound, poorly stitched. The parents were given permission to step inside one at a time. Lauren was first. Angela stood at the far end of the hallway, watching her disappear into the room. It took maybe 30 seconds before Elaine emerged again, her hands trembling as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. She didn't say a word, just nodded stiffly to her husband. Robert went in next. When he returned, his face was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles jumped under the skin. He placed a hand at the small of his wife's back and guided her down the hall, like he couldn't get her away fast enough. Marianne Pierce, Lauren's mother, waited in silence for the officer to nod her in. Inside, she didn't look at the beds first. She went straight to the desk, running her fingertips over the coke and the neatly stacked books. She paused at the closet door, its brass knob reflecting a thin line of light. The screws were gone now, but the small indents in the wood remained, tiny circles that seemed to her more damning than anything else. When she emerged, her face hadn't changed, no visible collapse, but she carried herself like someone carrying a weight. She knew she couldn't sit down in the small lounge down the hall. The family sat together for the first time. No one knew what to say. There were murmurs about the investigation, the possibility of private detectives, the need to keep this in the public eye, but beneath it all was the question they didn't voice: how do you search for someone who's already gone? Later that afternoon, the police asked if either family knew of anyone. The girls might have been afraid of. The answers were the same. No. Did they have boyfriends? Not really. Friends they spent most of their time with, mostly each other. Any reason they might have wanted to leave school? Absolutely not. As the parents left, Angela noticed the smallest, most human details. Elaine's hand lingered on the stair rail, as though steadying herself. Robert's eyes flicked up toward the third-floor windows, searching for something only he could see. Marianne paused on the sidewalk in front of West Hall and looked up at the row of lit windows. Rain gathered in her hair, caught on her lashes. Angela would later swear she saw her mouth form silent words, not a prayer, not a curse, just names. When the cars finally drove away, the campus felt quieter than it had since the night of the disappearance, and in room 317, behind the still open closet door, the air held that faint, sweet trace of perfume, as if it were waiting for someone to notice it again. On paper, West Hall was just another aging dorm in a small liberal arts college. 3 floors, 48 rooms, a shared lounge on each level, and a history that looked tidy enough in brochures. But buildings keep their own histories, and not all of it makes it into the pamphlets. The first public record of West Hall appeared in 1928, when it was built as a boarding house for unmarried female teachers. The local newspaper praised it as a safe and proper environment, a phrase that would read differently. Decades later, in 1954, it was purchased by the college and converted into student housing. By then, the ivy had already claimed most of the east wall. Inside, the original wood floors creaked in protest under the shuffle of 100 different lives moving through its halls. For most of its history, the dorm's oddities were chalked up to quirk: the closet doors that stuck in summer humidity, the occasional flicker in the hallway lights, the way sounds seemed to travel strangely, conversations from one floor up, sometimes audible, as if they were right outside your door. But if you dug far enough back in local archives, you found patterns. 1962, a freshman named Margaret Hill was reported missing after failing to return from a study group. Her roommate claimed she'd last seen her putting things in the closet. No sign of Margaret was ever found. 1974, 2 students transferred mid-semester under undisclosed circumstances. In a later alumni interview, one of them admitted they'd left because something happened in that room, and the school made us promise not to talk about it. 1983, maintenance workers sealed off a first-floor storage room after a series of unexplained water leaks. Officially, it was a plumbing issue. Unofficially, the workers refused to go inside. Without another person present, the university never confirmed a link between these incidents. Officially, West Hall was structurally sound and without ongoing safety concerns, but in the corners of campus life, late-night conversations, whispered dares, the annual Halloween haunted tour, the stories lived on. The most persistent rumor was about the closets. No one could remember who started it, but the warning was passed down in half-joking tones: never sleep with your closet door open. It wasn't until the disappearance of Casey and Lauren that the pattern became harder to ignore. A local historian named Howard Ferris took interest in the case after reading a brief mention in the newspaper. Howard had been researching vanishing points in small-town architecture, places where multiple disappearances had occurred over decades. He came to campus one rainy afternoon in early November 1997, requesting access to the building's original blueprints. The dorm manager, an older man named Burke, was reluctant, but eventually produced them from a filing cabinet in his office. They were brittle, smelling faintly of mildew. The ink faded to a pale brown. Howard spread them across a long table and began tracing the outline of the rooms with his finger. "That's strange," he murmured, pointing to a small square between two second-floor rooms. A square that wasn't labeled, wasn't marked as a closet or a storage space. The dimensions didn't quite match the rooms as they existed now. It was as if something had been walled off. When Burke frowned and said the plans must be outdated, Howard shook his head. Buildings change, but they remember. Howard's research uncovered at least 7 other missing persons connected to the campus between 1960 and 1985, all last seen in or around West Hall. Some were residents, others visitors, all vanished without a trace. 4 of those cases involved rooms with closets that had been altered or sealed. Angela remembers the first time she heard about the history from Howard. They were sitting in the dining hall, her untouched coffee cooling between her hands. "You're telling me this has happened before?" she asked, her voice low. "Not exactly this," Howard replied, leaning forward, "but close enough that I'd be lying if I said I didn't see a pattern." Angela glanced toward West Hall through the rain-streaked window. The building stood there solid and still, as if daring them to keep looking. By the end of that semester, Howard had compiled a file thick with photocopied articles, eyewitness accounts, and faded Polaroids of the dorm in earlier decades. One of the photos, dated 1961, showed a group of smiling girls in front of a second-floor window. In the background, just inside the glass, there was a shadow. Howard never claimed it was anything more than a trick of the light, but he always kept that photo on top of the stack. The administration dismissed his findings as speculation. They stressed that no structural hazards had been found in inspections. Still, by the time winter break arrived, half the residents of West Hall had quietly requested room changes, and for those who stayed, the old joke about keeping the closet door shut stopped sounding like a joke at all. His name was Ethan Caldwell Jr., lived on the 3rd floor of West Hall. In 1997, 2 doors down from the stairwell, had been one of the first to volunteer a statement to campus police. "I saw Lauren. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. She was in the hallway. She wasn't alone at first. The details came easily, too easily. The man she was with was tall, wore a dark coat, kept his head down." Ethan said he didn't recognize him, claimed he assumed it was someone's boyfriend, maybe visiting for the weekend. A week later, when detectives followed up, the story shifted. Now, it wasn't Lauren in the hallway. It was Casey. And the man wasn't a stranger. He was someone from the library, a figure Ethan swore had seen earlier that evening near the East Wing. When asked why Head changed his account, Ethan shrugged. "I was tired that night. You remember things differently when you think about them more." Angela met him once, long after the initial investigation. It was in 2003 at a coffee shop downtown. He recognized her. "You're the one who knocked on their door and invited her to sit." His voice had the same quality she remembered from college, soft, almost apologetic, with long pauses before certain words, as if he were trying them on for size before speaking. At first, he spoke about the girls the way everyone did, fondly, cautiously, but the conversation took a turn when he leaned closer and said, "There's something I never told the police." He claimed that after the fire alarm went off that night, the one triggered by burnt popcorn around 10:30 p.m., he hadn't gone straight outside like everyone else. Instead, he lingered in the 3rd floor hallway waiting for the crowd to thin. That's when he said he heard it, the sound of a door closing softly somewhere below, then footsteps, slow, deliberate, peering over the railing. He saw someone coming up from the 2nd floor, someone carrying something, a bundle wrapped in dark fabric held tight against their chest. Ethan swore he couldn't see the person's face. The stairwell light flickered once, and by the time it steadied, they were gone. "Maybe it was nothing," he said, stirring his coffee, though had long stopped drinking. "It could have been laundry, right?" But he trailed off, looking out the window. It was too quiet. You carry laundry, it moves. This didn't. Angela pressed him. Why hadn't he told police this? Ethan smiled faintly, almost to himself. Because I didn't want them asking what I was doing there where I was supposed to be. Some questions you don't want people asking, and that was the problem with Ethan. Every piece of information came wrapped in another omission. Every detail felt like it had been rearranged just enough to make you doubt your own memory of what had said. Detectives had grown frustrated with him back in '97. His statements were inconsistent, his timelines shaky. Once under pressure, had admitted that maybe he hadn't seen either of the girls that night at all. Maybe it had been someone else with similar hair, but each time they dismissed him, something in his manner made them circle back again. Howard Ferris, the historian, had his own theory about Ethan. He saw something, maybe not what he thinks he saw, but something, and it scared him enough that his mind's been sanding off the edges ever since. Years later, when online forums began dissecting the case, Ethan's name resurfaced. Anonymous posts claimed he'd left the college abruptly the following semester, moved states, changed jobs. Often one user swore they tracked him down and asked about that night. The reply, I was there, I know what happened, but you wouldn't believe me if Ethan knew the truth. He kept it locked away the way a person keeps a door shut, not to hide what's inside, but to avoid what might come through if it opened. And in the story of Room 317, he became yet another closed door. By 2008, West Hall no longer housed students. The building had been converted into administrative offices, quiet fluorescent-lit spaces where filing cabinets replaced twin beds, and the hum of printers replaced the sound of late-night stereos. Most of the rooms had been stripped and repainted. The closets were emptied, their doors swung open to reveal nothing but dust and forgotten hangers, except for one room. 317 had been repurposed as a storage area for surplus furniture. The closet door was still closed, the knob cold to the touch. Maintenance records listed it as structurally sealed, no access required. It was during a summer renovation project that a new facilities supervisor, unfamiliar with the building's history, decided to open it. The work order was simple: remove door, inspect interior, repair as needed. 2 workers arrived on a Wednesday morning, tools in hand. The hallway was still, only the occasional echo of voices from the offices down the hall. They unscrewed the hinges methodically, the sound of the drill carrying in the narrow space. The door came loose with a reluctant sigh. A faint rush of air escaped, cooler than the room around it. Inside, it wasn't just empty space. The walls were bare, with no paint, no plaster. Along the inside of the door, about 3 feet from the floor, ran a cluster of deep scratches. They weren't neat. They overlapped and intersected like frantic handwriting. The wood was gouged, splintered in some places, the marks curving downward as though made by a hand, or hands that had grown weaker with each attempt. On the back wall, just above the floor, sat an old student ID. The photo was faded, the lamination cracked. The name was barely legible, but enough to make out Casey Lorne. The workers paused, unsure whether to touch it. Next to the ID, hanging from a rusted hook, was a hair ribbon, pale blue, knotted tightly, as though tied in haste. A strand of dark hair clung to the knot, brittle with age. Neither man spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the radiator in the corner. One of them stepped back to check the closet dimensions against the floor plans. They didn't match. The interior was deeper than it should have been, just by a few inches, but enough to make the mind wander to uncomfortable places. When the light from the hallway fell across the floorboards, they noticed something else: faint stains near the back wall, too old to identify, too far gone to test. The discovery was reported to campus administration within hours. The closet was photographed, cataloged, and closed again. The ribbon and the ID were logged into evidence and sent to the county archives. The official statement read, historical items of interest were found during scheduled maintenance. No further comment at this time. Angela didn't hear about it until months later through a friend who still worked on campus. She didn't go to see the closet. She didn't need to. In her mind, she could already picture it: the air still and cold, the scratches in the wood, the way the ribbons not would look if you leaned close, as though it had been pulled tight by desperate fingers. For those who knew the story, the reopening of the closet didn't bring closure. It brought a sharper question: if Casey's ID was inside, did that mean she'd been there? And if she had, who closed the door? By 2015, the story of Room 317 had passed into campus folklore, the kind of tale whispered to first-year students on their first night in West Hall, even though none of them had ever lived there. But beyond the ivy-covered walls, the disappearance of Casey Lorne and Lauren Pierce had taken on a second life, one that played out not in hallways and dorm lounges, but on screens. It started with a Reddit post in the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit: Two roommates vanished from my college dorm in 1997 closet. In their room was screwed shut from the inside, no bodies, no trace. The thread exploded overnight. Some users asked about police reports, others demanded photographs. A few questioned if it was just a well-crafted urban legend. By the next week, the case had its own Wikipedia entry. Cold case forums began dissecting every scrap of available information someone scanned in microfilm news articles from '97. Another user claimed to have a cousin who'd been an RA in the building that year. There were heated debates over timelines, theories about the transfer student who may or may not have existed, and long scrolling comment chains about the meaning of the scratches inside the closet. One thread ran for 427 comments debating a single question: if the closet was screwed shut from the inside, how did anyone leave? In 2018, a retired detective named Paul Madsen posted his own account. Had worked the case for 3 months before it was reassigned. He still remembered standing in room 317 staring at the neat beds, the untouched coke. It wasn't like a crime scene, he wrote. It was like someone pressed pause on a moment and just never came back to hit play. Madsen hinted there were details the public never knew, but refused to elaborate. This only fueled speculation. Podcasters picked up the story. YouTube creators turned it into top 10 creepiest unsolved disappearances videos, layering stock footage of dimly lit hallways over ominous piano chords. Some treated it as entertainment, others took it seriously. Too seriously. Angela once stumbled across a video where a man in a baseball cap stood outside the old building narrating to his viewers. If you listen closely, you can hear scratching at night. She closed the browser. She didn't want to know if he was right. And yet the case refused to fade. Every few years something would stir it back to life. 2008, the closet discovery during renovations. 2013, a false lead when skeletal remains were found in a nearby wooded area. They belonged to a missing hiker. 2019, a former librarian came forward with a story about a book returned the night of the disappearance, containing a folded scrap of paper with strange writing. None of it led to answers for some. The mystery became an obsession. Amateur sleuths mapped out the dorm's floor plan, analyzing escape routes. Others dug into public records for anyone matching the tall man in a dark coat description. One woman in Oregon claimed she'd served coffee to Lauren 2 years after the disappearance, but couldn't produce any proof. The more time passed, the more the story seemed to pull people in, as if the unanswered questions themselves had become the point. And through it all, the same image kept coming up: the one no one could get past, that closet door, those screws, the silent, impossible logic of it. It was early spring 2019 when the library renovation began. The building was older than West Hall, with high windows that rattled in the wind and dust that clung in layers to the tops of the stacks. The third floor, rarely visited, held a cramped alcove where outdated encyclopedias and damaged books had been stored for decades. 2 archivists were working there one afternoon, shifting brittle volumes into new boxes, when one of them noticed that the back row of books didn't quite touch the wall behind them was a narrow gap, and wedged inside something wrapped in brown paper. They pulled it free. The package was small, no bigger than a hand, tied with faded twine. Inside was a thin leather-bound notebook. The cover was worn smooth, the edges darkened with age. When they opened it, the first page held a name: Lauren Pierce. The journal wasn't long, barely 30 pages, written in slanted, hurried script. The early entries were mundane class notes, a short list of movies to rent, a few grocery reminders. But near the end, the tone shifted. The handwriting became cramped, the ink darker, as though pressed harder into the page. One entry, dated October 9th, 1997, the night of the disappearance, read: I can't go to sleep. He's back in the hall. Casey says it's fine, but I can hear him breathing. The next entry was shorter: if we keep quiet, maybe he'll go away. And then the final page, the writing was jagged now, the lines uneven. We can't get out. We can hear them outside the door. Casey says the closet is the only safe place. I told her it's too small, but she says small is good. Small means hidden. I'm writing this so if someone finds it, they'll know we didn't just leave. The last sentence trailed into a faint scrawl, almost illegible: don't open the door unless you're sure it's safe. The archivist contacted campus security, who contacted the police. The journal was logged as evidence, photographed, and stored. It never made the news. When Angela learned about it again through quiet channels, she couldn't decide whether it was a comfort or a cruelty. The words were Lauren's, she was sure of it, but they didn't answer the question that had haunted her for 2 decades. Why had the closet been screwed shut from the inside? If they'd hidden there willingly, what had they heard in the hall that was worse than being trapped? Online sleuths, once the journal's existence leaked, dissected every word. Some thought he referred to the mysterious transfer student. Others argued it was just campus paranoia magnified by the late hour in the building's creaks, but the last line, "Don't open the door unless you're sure it's safe," split the discussion in half. One side believed it was a plea to whoever found the closet later. The other side believed it wasn't meant for anyone human at all. In the end, the journal didn't close the case. It made the space between the facts feel even wider, because if Casey and Lauren had gone into the closet to hide, something else must have been in the hallway. And in all these years, no one has been able to say what. Today, room 317 is an office. A desk sits where Casey's bed once was. A filing cabinet now stands in the spot where Lauren kept her quilt and thrift store treasures. The walls have been repainted a bland modern beige, as if color itself might erase the past. The closet is still there, but the door has been sealed once more, not with crude screws, but with a solid sheet of painted plywood. No handle, no hinges, just a flat, smooth surface that pretends it was never a door at all. When asked, campus administration calls it a structural measure. They say the space behind it is unsafe for storage and no longer in use. But those who've worked in the building swear they can feel the temperature drop as they pass it. They say the sound changes there. The air goes thick, like the moment before you open your mouth to speak, but can't find the words. Angela visited once, years after the plywood went up. She stood in the hallway alone, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. She didn't touch the wall where the door used to be. She didn't have to. She knew exactly where it was. The outline still mapped in her memory, the brass knob, the chipped paint, the faint perfume in the air. For a long time, she just listened, not for knocking. She knew she'd never hear that again, but for the other sound, the one she thought she'd imagined that night. That slow dragging scrape. The file on the case still sits in county storage, thick with reports, photographs, and evidence bags that hold more questions than answers. The ribbon, the student ID, the journal, all artifacts from a story that refuses to end. Online, the theories still bloom. Some insist Casey and Lauren were victims of a predator who knew the building better than anyone. Others believe they never left the campus at all. That West Hall, with its uneven floor plans and walled-off spaces, holds more than just its own history, and a few, the ones who speak in lower voices, even in anonymous threads, believe something older was in that hallway in 1997. Something that didn't belong in the world outside. Every October, in the week leading up to the anniversary, someone will post a blurry photo of West Hall's exterior. The caption is always the same: the light was on in room 317. The school insists the office lights are on a motion sensor. They insist the building is locked at night. But in the photo, the light looks different, warmer, as if coming from a desk lamp on a night that never ended. There's a saying among the few who still remember the details: buildings keep what they're given. The plywood over the closet is just another layer, another memory pressed into place, and maybe somewhere behind it the air still carries the faint trace of perfume. Maybe the scratches are still there, waiting for a hand that will never finish them. Or maybe, and this is the thought Angela can't shake, maybe the real reason the door is sealed is not to keep people out, but to keep something in.